also some people So I'm joined by Nour Odeh and also Lara. They're both two amazing people in the Palestinian space. Nour is a political analyst, activist, and researcher. She also becomes spokesperson to the Palestinian Authority and was the first female government spokesperson.
As always, I think they regretted that.
And also founding member of the Democratic National Assembly of Palestine. And she's done, I'm sure you've seen online, so many different coverage, especially for Al Jazeera between 2006 and 2011, and just awarded her reporting in 2008 for the first report. And yeah, I'm sure in like these events, you have probably on a whole host of different shows from the Sunday Times to TRT World and Al Jazeera. And then we'll have Lara, who's an executive committee member of the Balfour Project, which was created by citizens to highlight Britain's record in Palestine before, during, and after the mandate, so 1840 to 1948, and then following events. From Nakba, and it kind of is trying to create, through education and advocacy, working for equal rights amongst all Palestinians and Israelis, which we'll go into in a bit more detail, and we'll also work with Parliament and government to try and raise awareness, which I think, as we've just discussed, and there's a notable dearth of, especially amongst younger populations and funny enough old ones, so there's never really been continuity of education. And she's also working as a senior foreign affairs, Defence and International Trade Research in the House of Commons, and she's doing a PhD research at King's College London, which is focusing on political narratives around terrorism and how this relates to implementing and understanding international humanitarian law and knowledge of the armed conflicts involving armed state actors. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you. It's a very fine introduction. I was just telling Lara when we were coming that I see myself as a storyteller first and foremost. I got into journalism because as a kid, I had to struggle to explain to people where I was from because they kept telling me that the place I claimed to be from wasn't this. And that is basically how I got into journalism and how I got into activism, right? To not just talk to those who I agree with, but to also kind of illuminate, I guess, some of the things that those who don't see me might not know, and then have constructive dialogue. And I'm very, very happy to be here. It was such a beautiful sight walking in to see the encampment, see my flag flying, and to see all that support. It touches the heart, and it means more than we can tell you to know that there is that much solidarity, and that there are that many students and that many campuses who are willing to take the risk, right, of standing up, speaking out at a time when it is not easy, to say the least. So thank you. Then,
I have very little to add other than that it is completely unfair to put me on par with Nour's greatness and all of the teaching. So I am very much here to learn and to listen as much as I'm sure you all are, and then to add anything that I can in terms of UK government narrative. One of the things that I found in the last year is that everybody now is talking about Palestine in a way which I don't think we've seen for a very, very long time in the UK. And when I'm discussing my research or I'm talking about my work in a professional context, people go, wow, that's so relevant. You're talking about, you know, UK policy and international law and how counterterrorism is involved in this conversation. That's so relevant, that's so trendy right now. And you kind of have to hide it. So it's been relevant for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, because of recent circumstances, it's a conversation which the public in the UK are engaging in more than they ever have before. From a parliamentary perspective, since the October 7th attack, we've had more emails to MPs about the UK government's reaction to what's going on in Gaza than we've had on any other issue in modern politics, more than COVID, more than Brexit, more than any other conflict, yeah. Politicians are inundated with constituent and public concern and question and pressure more than COVID. So if anything, that kind of shows where public direction is going, where public consensus is, and really widens the gap between where the public is and where our government currently is. So I will stop there, but we're here to get.
And that's some of the dynamics that we are going to touch on towards this part of the session. So kind of how I thought we could structure this was just beginning with a conversation opener by Nour. And then after I've got a few different themes that I wanted to touch upon for about half an hour before we were open to questions in the rooms, because I'm sure everyone has many. So without further ado, thank you.
So the one thing I wanted to say before we start our discussion is I think this is the perfect time to break away with a lot of the molds that the Palestine question has been trapped in for many, many years. And I'm not just talking about the peace process mold or the Palestinian governance mold. I'm talking about the even the psychology that has governed Palestine policy in the West primarily for so long. And I think in a nutshell, we can summarize it by saying that a lot of the governments, including here in London, have been comfortable praising or championing a so-called peace process, so long as that process is premised on Palestinians proving to the Israelis that they can be domesticated good beasts. There was never recognition of our humanity, of our ownership of the land, of our history, of the injustice that we have been enduring, and the role of governments, including in the UK, in that injustice. So we were asked to put all of that aside. Talking about history became labeled as incitement. Talking about the right of return was destructive to peace. Talking about boycott was and is labeled anti-Semitic instead of something completely consistent with international law. And what was demanded and continues to be demanded is a Palestinian government that is politics free, right? Devoid of any justice discourse, willing to kind of part with that, with the legitimacy that comes with owning their narrative and championing that and demanding to be treated as equals. So a demand, search, never-ending search for that right token Palestinian leader, or leaders who can play nice, who can say the nice things, who can discard all those supposedly controversial things, and serve what is expected of them, in essence, perpetuating the status quo, which is untenable. The fear that I would present here today, and I think we need to be very aware of, is that mainstream politics is trying very, very hard to take us back to October 6th. Instead of looking at what has happened, looking at the genocide, and finally reaching that moment of truth that says October the 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. The world didn't start on October the 7th. History didn't start on October the 7th. And as such, we need to figure out how to move on from a situation where this can happen, where the genocide can happen without consequence, and where the Israeli political establishment, opposition and government, can feel entitled to exact this much violence, this much death and destruction, and outraged that the world is asking them to live up to the standards every other state is supposed to live up to. So my hope is that we don't allow them to drag us back to the coast. That would be a tragedy. That would be a travesty. And we should never allow that. We are in a different place. And in many ways, it's in spite of the political will of governments and regimes. We are in a place where the ICC has issued or wants to issue arrest warrants, right, for the Israeli Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, and for the three top Hamas leaders. That is a scenario that I don't think most of us could have envisaged just a year ago, right? We are in a place where the ICJ is a trendy thing, right? This is a place, it's very important court, but it's a court that operated in, away from public attention for as long as it has existed. And now the world is watching and judging, and legal scholars are watching and judging. And I think the court understands that it is taking center stage because politics is failed and politicians failed. And they don't want to assume their responsibility. And so now it is incumbent upon that court to try and preserve a sense of integrity to the legal system that we want to believe applies to all. Because if it doesn't apply to all, it will apply to none. So you have a case and now under consideration of the ICJ about the legal status of the occupation, whether this whole thing is legal or not. And what does that mean for Israel, for Palestine, and for the rest of the world? And you have the genocide case, which is also something nobody would have imagined happened. And you have many countries joining that case, which is also unprecedented. So we are in uncharted legal history in many ways, and political history because of that divide between governments and the public, between people who feel, and rightly so, terrified that what they're seeing in Gaza is being mainstreamed and normalized. Because if it is normalized in Gaza, it will be normalized everywhere else. This is not just a Gaza problem. This is not a Palestine problem or an Israel problem. This is a problem that threatens the whole world. If we allow what is happening in Gaza to be accepted, then everybody should feel terrified that this will come knocking at it. Because in many ways, law is also set by precedent. And this is not a precedent. Humanity should be set there. Anyway, so hope is on you guys, not on governments. You have the privilege of being in a democratic country that has its many problems. I won't get into that, it's not my business, but all democracies are problematic, some more than others. But it's still a democracy where you can hold your elected officials to account. You can kick them out, right, when they don't do what they're supposed to do. It is a privilege because we've been denied that privilege, all under the excuse of preserving hope for peace, right? Palestinians have been deprived of their agency because everybody's afraid we're going to elect the wrong Palestinians. I was part of an independent ticket in the botched 2021 elections. And I saw one representative after another of Boston governments tell me why they weren't too excited about elections being held. They weren't too sure how it's going to go. And my question to them was always, are you sure how your elections are going? Is that a good enough excuse for you to stop elections in the UK or in France? Is the fact that Le Pen is a likely winner in upcoming elections in France good enough to stop elections? Or to withdraw recognition of France, maybe, or to sanction France, because the voters decided that she was, God help us, a good candidate. That's not how it should work. But it is, up until now, this is how it's working, right? And it's up to us to challenge it, and it's up to us to insist that if we're gonna have standards, they have to apply to everyone. There can be no exceptions. Exceptions to standards devoid of any meaning. And for a very long time, we've always been exception. So we've been taken out of the international system, denied the right to sit on the table, denied the right to knock on the doors of that world system. And in many ways, we've kind of barged in, right? We've taken in many places our rightful place, and now it's an uphill battle. against a system that was designed by former colonial powers in a way to kind of keep everything in order. Well, it's not, it's a whole mess, and very big mess, everything. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because all of that turmoil can turn into positive change if we work kind enough for it and don't surrender to all the things that is out there, all the dehumanization, all the maligning of voices that want a much better world, much better reality for all of us. So I think more than anything, as I was crossing the bridge from the West Bank to Amman and taking the trip, I kept thinking, I asked my friends in Gaza, what do you want me to tell people when I get to them? Well, the first thing they would come up with is, you know, a cynical joke, but you know, talk to them about Balfour, and I said, okay, fine. But besides the history, and they said, tell them we hear them. And we appreciate what they're doing. And that we know that it's a hard fight for them, because they are so far apart from where mainstream politics is, but that they shouldn't stop. And when the guns stop in Gaza, that's when they're gonna need you more, right? So the story will only begin if and when we get an end to the fight. So please remember that. We will need you more when cameras turn off than now. And I'm confident that you won't let them down. I'll stop here and open the question.
Thank you. I think everyone found that it's moving and thoughtful as I did, and I think that when there is such a dark and vacuum of Palestinian narratives running in the media, being able to hear someone speak at length is the experience that's currently affecting them, their friends, family across the different places within Israel Palestine. It's brings things much closer and like a reminder of why everyone should be steadfast in their activism and their advocacy and not their advocacy. Alluded to that it's part of what is being, I think, manufactured for us to consent to. So I think just before going into the questions, I thought it would be pertinent to begin with the kind of current running figures as they do change so dramatically day to day. We've seen everything from Al-Shifa Hospital back last year, Flower Massacre earlier this year in Punjab as well in January, 2 massacres over the weekend on consecutive days in refugee camps, decapitated bodies, babies, children being burned alive. And this is only one in a whole litany of simultaneous events that predate 1948, post 1948, the intifadas that I think, again, get lost and become normalized and desensitized to media. A child at the moment, if they've grown up in Gaza and they were born when the blockade was first, and then in 2007, they would have gone through at least 6 different assaults, a Great March of Return, upon which they still would have been met with live ammunition. There were conditions of water crisis, deep poverty, mental health. People don't talk about being in a post-traumatic state in Gaza or anywhere really, not in Palestinian territories, but it's an ongoing, continuous, repetitive format. At the moment, before or between 1988 and 2023, 90% of the total fatalities were 26,521 Palestinian, that's 90% of fatalities. And as of June the 2nd, there have been at least 36,439 people killed. And that's been 239 days into war, and that's more than we've ever seen, notwithstanding the number of people that were killed before. People have been displaced, as we've seen in multiple different times over the last 8 or so months. More than half of our homes have been killed, 80% of commercial, have been destroyed, 80% of commercial buildings, 49% of our hospitals are in partial functioning, 83% of ground control is not operational, and in the space of this hour that we are talking, not longer, 15 people would have been killed, 36 injured. According to figures based on United States law, 42 bombs have been dropped. And there's also, we're seeing stuff in the West Bank as well, which we're going to, where at least 523 people have been killed and 132 children since October 7th. And I think one thing I just wanted to conclude on, if people aren't following Gaza Poets on Instagram, I really recommend, because I think it puts and captures into words what's, even though we're human rights organisations, people talking continuously about siege on Gaza and all the fronts, how it's a place that's not even possible to live as a human. There's one poet called Mohammed Musa who said that upon awakening Gaza was immediately confronted with the harrowing reality of life threatened by destruction. The once Indian scenes been replaced by landscape of devastation as families poured to the road seeking safety amidst a relentless barrage of bombs. Streets and buildings bear the marks of war, their features altered in a way that seems to erase the very memory of the city as if it has been consumed by the relentless machinery of war. There's one that keeps going around with Peacebuilding's death that was written in 2018, and the author of which said on the 25th of May that it never stopped. So this, I want to really contextualize it and historicize this. War in Gaza, remember that it's not in isolation. So kind of going from that, I just wanted you to describe to me what life was like in Ramallah before October 7th, how it's changed since, and how you perceive these changes and affected Palestinians in the rest of West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza in terms of military presence, the IDF, sense of violence, and online censorship.
So, life in the West Bank is never easy, because it is a life that you live in spite of the occupation, right? Which controls every aspect of your life. It controls how you can move from one place to another. It controls if you live or die. It controls whether you have access to goods or not on a certain day. So these Israelis are on holiday, the provision of goods gets disrupted. So you plan your life around Israeli holidays. So if you know one major holiday is coming up, you stock up on the stuff that will be disrupted. The dairy products, if you have a kid with a certain condition, who needs certain milk, special kind of milk, you get that because you don't want to be in a position where the gates are closed and you're out of what you need to get. When I lived in Gaza, my eldest was severely lactose intolerant, so he survived on soy milk, and soy milk was banned in Gaza, and so I had nothing to give my son Yasser. I was lucky because at the time I was with Al Jazeera, and my friend, my colleague who would come in from time to time to Gaza would bring me cartons and cartons of milk. And then I found a network of moms who had my same problem, and we ended up, sharing and so on. So it is a life we live in spite of all of that, right? You plan your life not so much by planning it, by knowing what you want, because you can't really set a time frame. You can't set a clear path. You have to learn how to do a lot of roundabouts, how to adjust quickly, and without too much time for grief, without too much time for misery, without too much time of why me, kind of feeling. There is no time for that. You need to be able to adjust and move on. So in the West Bank, everything revolves around that kind of dynamic. Gaza, you know, there's a gate, you close the gate, and then everybody inside is bombarded, not just by bombs, but by all the restrictions, pre-October 7th, right? So, you know, the shortages of everything, the fact that you may not be able to leave because of the closures and the siege. If you get sick and you need life-saving treatment in the West Bank, you may end up having a death sentence because you're not allowed to. So that is in Gaza. In the West Bank, it is similar in some ways because there are a lot of mini Gazas in the West Bank. There are a lot of communities that are completely closed in the West Bank by gates, literal gates that close. Communities that are shrinking, because if you are from that community and you marry someone from outside it, they cannot live with you in that village. You must leave, right? And so the population reduces and the area keeps shrinking. In my very comfortable neighborhood in Ramallah, when I look out my balcony, I see an Israeli settlement keeps getting closer to my home. I see an Israeli military camp where hundreds of Palestinians are in prison, mostly without charge. The open military camp, where there's a military court as well. So I know that literally a stone's throw away from me, there are people who are held prisoner. Some of them are my friends. Some of them have been brought in from Gaza now. And that whole area keeps getting larger, and so it keeps getting closer. When I first moved into that apartment, I didn't see soldiers in my neighborhood. Now they walk around the street right below me, right? They do their exercises. At night, sometimes they target practice, so we collect the empty shells of bullets from the balconies so that the kids don't see them and get scared. So that was life. Post-October, all of those mini Gazas and all of that prison reality got all the more harsh, right? So schools went online because it was no longer safe for kids to walk to their schools. Universities went online because, well, their students walk with a target on their back. And for many, many months, that's how it stayed. Even in Ramallah, my youngest son's school went online for over a month because in their school, there are kids who come from nearby villages, and it was just too dangerous to move. And if they could come in the morning, there was no guarantee that they could go home in the afternoon. So they went online, and they were lucky that way to be able to maintain their education. So it's never, Gaza is never far. I know sometimes for news coverage purposes, we paint it as a separate world, but it's not. And family relations between Palestinians who are in the West Bank and in Gaza are strong. There are 1,000 Palestinians who hail from Gaza who live in the West Bank. So the sense of grief and the sense of loss is everywhere, right? And that's why the sense of fear and certainty that this is coming to the West Bank is also very. When this mad war started, my youngest, who's going to be 9 in August, he asked me, when is it going to be our turn, right? When will they finish from Gaza and bomb us? I had no answer for him. I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not going to give him assurances that I can. And I'm saying that to give you an idea of how real the fear is, right? That this kid, who I make a point of not watching news in front of, felt threatened and continues to be a threat. Because he understands that as a Palestinian, he is a target. Even though he lives a very pampered, shielded life. Right? He's not in a refugee camp that gets raided every day. He's not in a village that gets raided by Israeli settlers on a regular basis. He's an upper middle class, pampered, beautiful child. And yet he feels like that. And I think you take that and you kind of extrapolate, and it gives you a sense of where Palestinians know us back on, right? And Jerusalem is isolated by way of all the restrictions that Israel imposes. We don't get to be in Jerusalem unless we have a permit. Permits have been suspended since October the 7th. My child, his father, comes from a family from Jerusalem. He's never seen it. Doesn't know what it looks like. My eldest, when he was studying in 4th grade about Jerusalem, I remember him asking me, you know, when did Jerusalem have people, right? To him, Jerusalem was the old city, and he imagined it as an empty place, like almost like a museum, like an archaeological site. It broke my heart because I couldn't take him there. He was lucky that his grandfather was alive, so I asked him to sit with his grandpa and hear about Jerusalem. That is full of life, people, history, stories. So he got that. But it was a process for him to kind of make peace with the fact that Jerusalem is not an archaeological site. It's an alive city, tormented, but alive, full of people. But he can't go there. He has no permits to go to Jerusalem. So what was never tolerable is now completely unbearable after October the 7th. Because you have a sense of helplessness, you cannot do anything. Right? You wake up in the morning too scared to hold your phone because you don't want to find out who you've lost, friends and colleagues and so on. I watched all the corners that were home to my memories in Gaza, where I lived for many years, turn to rubble. I saw the office where I grew into who I am, a shell of itself, and I only recognized it because of the distinct color of the paint. So I saw a shell of a building with that paint, and I knew it was where my office was. And then I asked, and I verified. So you feel helpless. The banks are too scared to allow you to transfer money to help because Israel can shut them down. And that only adds to the frustration. Because you can't do anything. Maybe that's why we can't compromise so much.
I think this sort of interesting and passionate how pervasive this is in all its distinctions, like, you know, intersections that cross paths between each of the occupied territories and also of the diaspora. I think just going on from that, we've spoken a little bit about these narratives, but I noticed on watching the different religions online, there's quite a marked difference in the question posed to you by lots of Western media outlets like the Sky News or Sunday Times compared to those that go south, like Al Jazeera, TRT World, and so as well as to essentially, they're not watching essentially, but the former often exhibited a lack of depth, insight, understanding of all the context of Gaza and Palestine, while focusing narrowly confined to the events of October 7th and see or trying to get your personal opinions when you're coming there as an analyst, or they try and conflate your views as though you're speaking on behalf of the Palestinians. So I just wanted to know, why do you think there is this emphasis on decontextualizing and de-historicizing what is currently going on in Gaza without reflecting on or acknowledging asymmetrical power dynamics, historical instances of violence against Palestinians, And then also having fewer perspectives to begin with. Like, for example, in 2005 opinion pieces discussing Palestine, but in the New York Times in 1770, less than 2% were actually written about Palestinians. And also there's so much focus on the security of just Israel,
Right.
without ever saying too directly the security of Palestinians and what that would look like. So yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on why there is such a decontextualization of these division.
I think, to be blunt, it starts with racism, right? The fact that we're not seen as humans of equal worth. There isn't, it's easier and it's mainstream and it's, comfortable to view Israelis as first of all, as a monolith, which they're not, and second of all, as our people, right? So they look like us, they speak like us, they share our values, whatever that means. And then we are the brown people, the savages, the Muslims, although we're not all Muslim, the people who don't share the values, right? And all sorts of crazy things are, go from there. I've heard some amazing things, that you can't really, I don't see a point in arguing. I can't dignify it by explaining to someone that I am here, right? It's just, I don't feel that it's worth my time. To prove to someone that I am actually a normal human being, that I have the same rights and so on. But that is still part of the mainstream. I saw a clip, a very disturbing clip, today in the morning of Bill Maher. Regrettably know him, but yes, he was talking about Gaza, also as a monolith. And he was basically had the audacity to say, this is a place where pedophilia is normal, where women have no rights, where this and that and the other. Well, not only is this completely false and fabricated, but it speaks to the mentality. And it also speaks to what you can say and get away with, right? You can get away with dehumanizing Palestinians, with dehumanizing Muslims, with demonizing Muslims. But you can't get away with criticizing Israel. There is a cost attached to that. So it's easier for people in the mainstream to stick to what works, what is cost-free. And I think in many ways, that is why mainstream media is losing ground. I don't know how they will figure out a way to still be relevant commercially if more and more people migrate to other forms of media. But eventually, I think they will have to have conversation in some closed room about it, because people cannot take that kind of coverage seriously anymore. They have access to other media. So yes, thank God for Al Jazeera and others, but also thank God for authentic Palestinian voices and voices from the South that can communicate on a personal level with everybody and show them what their reality is like, in a way liberating themselves from the confines of mainstream media. So I've done a lot of mainstream Western media, especially in the beginning. It was quite nasty, right? The first question was always, do you condemn Hamas? Well, A, I am not Hamas. Second of all, who cares if I condemn Hamas, right? My opinion is irrelevant as an analyst. And B, and three is the question asked in reverse. Do you condemn Israeli occupation? Do you condemn Israeli manslaughter of Palestinians? That is never asked, right? But somehow I need to justify my presence on a mainstream screen by distancing myself from the background. It's getting old and redundant and completely lacking credibility, I think. Maybe this is one of the good outcomes of this test. That eventually they will, like I said, they will have that conversation, that closed editorial meeting about their viewership and where they stand on these things. But that's what we are.
I think obviously no similar shape or form, but even growing when you said about having to always distance yourself before you have the rights or legitimacy to speak. I think growing up in post-global warfare landscape, one always finds themselves when they have to explain to their friends, you know, Al Qaeda and Taliban, they're not representative of my views, then there are so many different denominations and understandings of Islam, and having to say, oh, it's politically weaponized, or you know, trying to some of these people who I'm sure everyone here would know about the conflation of the word terrorist and the use of Islam as just going on as well. So yeah, no, I do understand that aspect, and I think it is important when one thing we've not seen coverage of is like the early stages, like your Kalam saying, we're putting a complete siege on Gaza, no electricity, no food, no water, no gas, no clothes. We're fighting animals and acting accordingly. It really encapsulates in a sentence that sub-humanization or even dehumanization of Palestinians. And again, if anyone is interested, I would really recommend Let's Go Palestine. They have a whole thread that actually is from 73, so 5th of January 2023, where people were running very big to Smotrich, to Netanyahu, have said this kind of stuff. This is again not a recent phenomenon.
And it's not just the Israeli rights.
No.
The new leader of Labour also said that there should be no humanitarian assistance to Gaza, let them starve until all the captives are out, and so on and so forth. So that narrative is mainstream, right? And one of the ironies I think about with the depiction of Palestinians in mainstream Western media is the fact that our identity, our multidimensional identity as Palestinians is erased. We are the homeland of the first Christians, right? Jesus was born in Palestine. Gaza is home to one of the oldest churches in the world. All of that is erased because otherwise the picture becomes inconvenient, right? We're not a model. We're not all observant Muslims. We have a long-standing history of very progressive, left-leaning groups, and so on and so forth. All of those inconvenient facts about Palestinians have to be erased to make the mainstream discussion a lot more convenient.
Yeah, and even going back to Balfour, it refers to Palestinians as being respecting the rights of the non-Jews.
Non-Jewish,
and so I mean
the squatters that were there before.
If anyone wanted to pick up this book, it goes into so much detail, especially and I also really recommend this to be able to. It's important that we have knowledge to be able to learn these things. As thrown our way, have them asked. So we had a bit of a discussion on Friday before this, when you mentioned your main proponent, you mentioned in very more details with your impression of choosing a solution would be. And that was in response to my reference to the attended last week, and General, who's an editor of Plus 972 and associate fellow at the Palestinian program, noted that Palestinian citizens living in Israel tend to favor one state solution. That's kind of been where they're aware there's a hierarchy that's been there, they've reality since then. And this discussion, as you said, highlighted the different forms and perspectives amongst Palestinians of economic siege, violence, restrictions, and movement. Can you elaborate on this phenomenon, why you prefer this idea, but also what you define as being just and durable? Because I think that's why Nour maybe why talking about peace can be problematic in certain contexts.
Right.
But why you think to begin with two-state?
Well, I mean, first of all, the two-state formula for me is not about justice. It's about breaking a very toxic relationship between occupier and occupied, right? So in a sense, if you have an abusive relationship, the only way to heal is to end that relationship, right? Part, you get the therapy you need, you come back into your own, you stand on your own 2 feet, and then maybe you can reconcile. But I think before that, I personally don't want to be part of the one state apartheid reality in Israel. Right, I'm already experiencing colonization and apartheid as a Palestinian in the 67 areas. I want that disconnect. I want to be able to live free of Israeli domination. And I think Israelis, Jewish Israelis, need to also live free of the reality of being oppressors. They need to face that. They need to make peace with the fact that they're oppressors. Advocating for one state at this point, for me, blurs the line about Palestinian self-determination. It allows Israelis not to face the reality of what they've done and what they're doing, which I think is counterproductive. Because it will take decades for that to happen, and maybe the dynamic, the power dynamic, will be impossible to break for generations to come. I think in order to move forward, we need Palestinians, first of all, to be recognized, to have their self-determination respected, honored, to have their history recognized. And that starts with recognizing the land. And you can't do that if you say, okay, Israel is in full control from the river to the sea, so let's just ask them to make a citizen. No, I don't want to be a citizen of that state, right? I think eventually, from the river to the sea will only be a one state, but it has to be a one state born out of the healed decisions of Palestinians and Israelis, not the hegemonic giveaway of the colonizer. And that is why I think the two-state formula, which I don't even like to call a solution, is the formula that needs to happen. Because without it, you don't call things by their name, right? You don't classify the settlements as illegal, as a war crime. You don't talk about the Nakba, you don't talk about the dispossession. And I think we owe it to ourselves as Palestinians, but also Israelis who believe that there has to be a better way to be, also owe it to themselves. And those who've made that difficult journey of self-unlearning and learning about themselves and their own history and their relationship with Palestinians don't want to lose them. They want other fellow Israelis to see that as well. Very painful journey, and I think those who have made it are very, very courageous. They're lone voices in the desert, so to speak. So yeah, it's not easy, but we shouldn't let anybody off the hook, right? And the world needs to understand that this is not about process or horizon, right? They say horizon, I hear mirage. It's not a horizon. They need to, out of this genocide, there needs to be a realization that we need a timetable for implementation. Right? Don't trap me in a room with my oppressor who can control everything in my life until we figure it out. See what you can get from them. See what they will give you. It's not theirs to give. That's the shift that I think we need to be working on.
Thank you. I think I'm gonna follow that perhaps a few different questions together that I was going to ask. But kind of do you think post-27 we need to be looking to existing frameworks or formulas or the stretched out Montreux Oslo the last 30 years and that being very obviously status quo rather than it being towards some kind of formula, as you say, then how you touched again as well on how Palestinians might be able to bridge that lost time and disruption caused by the encounter with present realities. But I think one thing that's clear from the international community is that it's been acquiescing to what an Israeli vision of peace is, rather than that of Palestinians. And that kind of brings me on to you said before that the 2021 elections, when Abbas said that, well, he basically voted to throw it out the window. What can we see given this partisan fragmentation, also complicity of people like the PA and PLO, although you know that more based on foreign affairs, in helping maintain that conditional wage most of it's my understanding money that it gets from West Bank goes into reinforcing security and half of it actually get many of the privileges economically of what is produced within the occupied territories. How do you see amidst that fragmentation there being some kind of new legitimate leadership which can emerge that isn't just, you know, punted down from the US and so.
This is, I think, one of the most difficult things that we face as a nation, because in many ways we are hostage to several dynamics. On the one hand, we're hostage to the Western dynamic that wants to choose a convenient, comfortable Palestinian to live with, someone, a yes man. And then we have Hamas that has supported backing, not just in Gaza, more on the West Bank, I would say, than in Gaza at this point. And you have regional players that also play into the internal division and kind of help it stay, right, for their own purposes. And you have a Palestinian population that has, at this point, no peaceful avenue towards change, right? Our processes and our institutions have been deconstructed by a West that does not want to see Palestinians. Can we break that? I think we can, but I think that will require a lot of pressure on Western governments to let go, right? Let go of the approach that they need to have final say on who rules over the Palestinians. And we need Palestinian leaders and groups to emerge and be able to challenge what's happening without slipping into civil war. That is the delicate dynamic, right? And in many ways, I think the Democratic National Assembly was born out of that, all of that, right? We wanted a path to change that didn't involve confrontation, that involved dialogue and competition, question. So we wanted people to decide, to see that there are many options. We are a very, very vibrant society, very opinionated and very varied, right? And you will see in the same family people spanning in opinion from the far left to the far right. And we know how to coexist in families. We failed miserably in political life. We failed our people. And we have not honored, and not just their sacrifice, but their intelligence, their need for leadership that works for them rather than the other way around. And I think right now we can all, as Palestinians, safely say that our political groups feel that we, the people, are there to serve them. They kind of misunderstand how this thing's supposed to work. It's supposed to be really well. But Western influence and regional power plays are allowing this to perpetuate. It will take a lot, given what's happening right now in Gaza. First of all, for Hamas to feel the need to talk to Fatah and the other players who have not contributed, who have not been part of the battle. And it will take a lot to change the clique in Ramallah, so to speak, in, to change the people, because they are not going to change their approach. Mazen is 86 going on 100, and it's just, he's not gonna change it. So we have a lot of homework to do ourselves. I frankly don't know how this is going to play out in the end. I'm hopeful that when the dust settles, the change will come from Gaza. It's not gonna come from the West Bank, which is hostage to so many things. But Gaza will force a change. The political system, at least post-war, will be Gaza-centric for a while. And so there is an opportunity for change to happen, starting in Gaza, where we can reimagine our political system. But it's gonna be a fight, not just domestically, but it's gonna be a fight with the powers that be.
I think, now because I'm aware of time, I'll just finish on a couple of questions. One that may come in as well, just on the ICC and the ICJ rulings, and also the current new violence group on green planning, just suppose I wanted your
Violence is really that.
Yeah. So do you see international law as and its institutions as aiding or obstructing the current process of regulation towards this immediate process you referred to, and does the applications of slightly Western governments have public precedent, and do these institutions have a body any more than just symbolic power? Because I mean, like past things like I feel like international was getting debated for quite some time, and there's been a lot of double standards that have been very much what it's like. So yeah, just thoughts on those, and also the proposed and before we then move on to something hopefully not lighter, but it can give them a bit.
Should I start, please? So, yes, I think caveat, I'm a lawyer, so I do believe in the law, and not in an idealistic, I think law is perfect, I don't think law is flawed. I believe that it can offer solutions, even when it has historically got things wrong, even when it is not perfect. I believe that small steps of progress can still help the overall end goal of moving towards a direction which is better for people who are persecuted and people who fall to justice. I think there are serious issues with the way in which both the ICJ and the ICC have been conducting themselves and some of the timings in terms of decisions that we made. But I also think the way in which they've been weaponized by specifically the UK government. I mean, we know the US is going to do that. We understand what their perception and their relationship with international law is. But the UK government specifically, historically, has been a supporter of international law, has been a supporter of the rule of law. And the way in which we've seen that shift change so drastically with so little accountability and such little questioning, I think it's very worrying. So I think the two questions that you asked, one about how the international law can have an impact or whether it can, and the way in which Western governments are perceiving and interacting with those, fall under the same question, really, because it is a perpetual cycle. And I think talking specifically of a couple of examples within Parliament recently, since October, for example, that I think are moving at this point. I'm sure you'll all have seen some of the horrific acts of this Parliament since October 7th from across the political parties. And we've had examples for example, where we've had UK government ministers saying things like, they should just turn the water on. That's something that they should just do. And then when it's rebutted and put to them, okay, is that an exception? Is that an acceptance from your part that Israel is using starvation and the withholding of aid as a weapon of war? No, that's not what I said. There's no evidence to support this. We had submissions from Al-Haq here in the UK about the UK government's breaching of both domestic and international law when it comes to the grants of arms systems. oh no, but there's no evidence to suggest that IHL is actually being breached. It's convenience when they can use it to perpetuate their own narratives. For example, we see this in Ukraine and Russia when it supports the position which they already are standing in, but that doesn't translate when it comes to people and communities who they can't relate to their common bosses. It doesn't already fit their political objective and their political objective. And I think the way in which we've seen international law be used as a weapon within UK Parliament itself is very, very important. Because if we don't have, you know, a Parliament member of Security Council supporting the UN, supporting special rapporteurs, supporting independent investigations which are ongoing, then we're seeing deconstruction of the international world order as we know it, which is constructed partly and historically by the United Kingdom as a protection mechanism for those who do face injustices. And I think that is a very, very worrying perspective. The ICC specifically, I think we've had a lot of criticism about the timing of the application for arrest warrants, whether it was productive to issue arrest warrants for Hamas leaders at the same time as Netanyahu. Does that equate crimes committed? I think these conversations are interesting from an academic perspective, but actually, if we look at it in the bigger picture, I think international law is going to have a massive impact. It's partly, as you said, because politicians are unable to approach this for so many different reasons. And I think a lot of what we've discussed, a lot of what we've been moving to today can be really, really oversimplified. It's simplified by the fact that the UK government doesn't even understand its own history in Palestine. Really simplified. They don't. You don't have individuals sitting in government who understand what happened during the mandate period. You don't understand how that has impacted Palestinians, how that has taken away their own autonomy, because they are still in this biggest bully in the playground colonial mindset, and where the public and the people have changed the systems and the procedures that allow the UK government to perpetuate the way in which they've always acted have not changed.
Yeah.
And so, from my perspective as a lawyer working in politics, the two can really butt heads sometimes, but they can also really support each other where one fails. And I think what we're going to have to see now is hopefully international law stepping up to try and balance out the complete inadequate response that we've had from governments. And I think that's going to be a very difficult game to play because we're seeing the governments perpetuating international law as this sympathizer of terrorists and being used to corrupt and being used to completely dismantle Israel's need for protection. And that's the way that we're seeing it go. And that's really worrying. But I believe that there are good lawyers and there are lobby groups and campaign groups and independent investigative bodies working tirelessly to ensure that these systems are upheld. And I think we're in a critical juncture with it. Again, that's not a new perspective, but we are in a critical juncture with international law. And I think I have to believe that it will prevail. And I have to believe that the tiny steps that we make will make a massive difference. For example, you know, the UK government lawyer in the ICJ case about the occupation, even when he dismissed the ICJ's jurisdiction to hear this case, did admit in court that the UK government perceives the occupation to be prolonged and illegal. Now that got completely overlooked because it was post October 7th, and that's where everyone's focus is. But that's a really big deal. Yeah. We have this acceptance from the UK government in the context of the ICJ that they take that occupation to be prolonged and illegal. We haven't even had UK government ministers accepting that in Parliament. So not only are we seeing a shift in the way that the UK government is conducting itself in an international context versus in a domestic context, which completely alludes to the lack of understanding at both the legal and the political level, the fact that those are not talking to each other. But we have that declaration, that's on record. They can't take that back. You know? And that's a small step in the grand scheme of things, but it opens up the door for a lot of legal actions to be taken. And we shouldn't be saying that. It's a very long answer. But
no, I agree with you. I think there is a threat. What is happening right now threatens to deconstruct the international system. And like I said at the beginning, this should worry everybody. not because the system is great or perfect, it's not, no system is. But either we have a system that we can all, agree is the, confines and governs how we deal with one another as states and peoples, and so on, or it's just the jungle. And in many ways, look, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, Western diplomats used to be so upset when we would tell them, you have a moment of truth. You cannot be against the invasion of Ukraine, the annexation of Ukrainian territory, and still justify the annexation of Palestinian territory and the occupation of Palestine. And they would really get offended, not seeing the white privilege from which they're speaking. They're completely different things, but they're not. Legally, they're not. No, but you can't compare them. Yes, I can. And when this genocide war started, I think Borrell was the first to kind of put it out there and tell governments, this is it. Now it is our moment of truth, and we cannot kind of ignore that parallel. It's there. So the ICJ and the ICC couldn't be great and nice and wonderful and, dependable and authoritative when it came to Ukraine, and now all of a sudden they're worthless. It doesn't work. They're either worth what they're, and do what they're supposed to do, or they don't. So to be honest, the Americans and those who will walk in their footsteps on this issue sound quite ridiculous. And terrifying, if you think about it strategically, of where that would take us.
Can I just pick one point up, just to summarize that? I think something that's very important is looking at language. You spoke about language a lot at the beginning when you introduced. I think where the law can be incredibly powerful is when we take what we're seeing as facts and remove the political narrative around those factual actions which are happening, and put them in a context where there's legal language and therefore legal obligations, consequences attached to actions, right? So you see it all the time, the difference between the legal and the political analysis of what's going on in the past, right? Politicians will call it a war or a conflict, but lawyers are now starting to talk about a genocide, because there are consequences attached to that legal language. And so calling it what it is and legalizing it, whilst not helpful for the politician, is very helpful for the law. Because when we start talking about it in the correct language in the legal sphere, we understand what the next steps are for that, where politicians don't have direction. So it's not a war, it's not a conflict, it's a genocide. It's not, mass displacement, it's forced displacement, which has legal consequence to it. It's not beatings or violence, it's torture. It's arbitrary detention, it's kidnapping, enforced, absolutely. These actions have consequences both to the state and the individual, in which court context should be correct. Yeah. So when we remove it from the political language, and we strip the politicians of the power that they have hiding behind words, and we attach language which has precedent to it, and we force them into that corner and go, no, let's talk about this from a legal context. Then they're left completely defenseless, because they can't.
And by the way, this is why many used to call Palestine's bid to accede to the Rome Statute Palestinian nuclear option.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it was. That's what it was called before it became true, because these governments understood what being part of the ICC would mean, what using those legal tools would mean. It's not a battlefield where they can win, because the law is actually quite clear, and part of it was written, you read it and you cannot help but see Palestine kind of screaming at you, right? You look at their own statute and what it says about settlements. Hello? So many things. So that's why literally it was called the nuclear option. And Western diplomats would come to Palestinian leaders and tell them, don't push that button, just don't use the nuclear option. Just briefly on what Biden is doing. I think Biden is maneuvering, is at the end of the day trying to save Israel from itself and save Netanyahu. It makes absolutely no sense. The conversation we're having about this maneuver is crazy, right? The president of the United States introducing an Israeli plan that he hopes Israelis will accept. That's basically what he said. It makes no sense. But that's because Biden needs to save Israel from itself, to save Netanyahu from leaving himself, but also to get a little breathing room ahead of elections. And I don't think that Netanyahu is going to give him that. I think he will let Biden sink, because not care less if Biden wins. In fact, I think he's a lot more comfortable with the alternative. And Biden being so ideological, so old and set in his ways and so blind Palestinian humanity, that he is personally incapable of being sympathetic to Palestinians as per his age. That's not just an observation. He is trying to maneuver and reset the narrative where the party that doesn't want the genocide to end and doesn't want to reach an agreement is not Israel. But the members of the governing coalition in Israel aren't even given Biden the chance to reset the narrative, right? They're too comfortable in their politics that they've come out already. They've attacked Biden, attacked the plan. So I don't know how they will reformulate the narrative to say that it was Hamas who said no, but I think that is what that maneuver is all about. It's not really about anything.
So many things that I think in both what you said about the way the discourse and what we say is so how I don't know about anyone else, but I felt completely like the whole thing was nonsensical, meaning that strategy and I'm not an analyst by any means, but from what I hear, if you look at strategy on the ground, what the Israeli government are doing, and it doesn't seem to, and this is popular opinion amongst Israelis, is that the hostages that remain are being prioritized, so obviously you can't remove the ideology, this kind of forgetting that the 3-point plan that we're currently seeing is quite similar according to journalists to what we saw in April, which Hamas had also agreed to at the time. And there's this blur, this forgetting, this complete amnesia. That I think was not so well. And just very last thing before we get to questions. One of our professors here, do you know himself? Yeah, he's also a Palestinian former journalist. She kind of wrote a poet from Gaza Responsible, and I think this appropriately summarized all the different things that are associated with Gaza. I wanted to ask you for why it is important to elaborate on the significance of acknowledging Palestinian joy amidst all of the fatal injustices. And she says that in this book that it describes how the word Gaza immediately evokes an abundance of metaphors such as open air prison, terror resistance, occupation, siege, and trauma. Similarly, a range of metaphors recall Gaza, including crisis exception, refugees, destitutions, tunnels and persistence. It's noted, as we said, that there are common stereotypes disguised with visual and linguistic tools that can obscure, not that there can ever be a true essence, but the people that humanize it, and it relegates it solely to space being a humanitarian disaster or incomprehensible violence. Notwithstanding, as she continues, that Gaza remains a vivid and painful contemporary example of the violence and the modern warfare, and the ability to endure violence. What metaphors would come to mind when you think of Palestine and Gaza and remembering that joy and why we need to continue and be thinking that these are here?
They are. Mahmoud Darwish wrote an amazing poem about Gaza. I hope it was translated to English. But in essence, what he says is Gaza is not the most beautiful city in the world. It has no riches, but Gaza is a place that inspires, right? The best and most passionate. That's what sticks out, right, when I think of that. It is a place of a lot of competition. It is a place where there's a lot of suffering. But it's also a place that is incurably alive. These are people who insist on living, on being the best in whatever they do. And I don't mean to romanticize Palestinians in Gaza. This is my lived experience. People who, in spite of being brutalized, and Gaza was always the subject of more brutality than fellow Palestinians elsewhere. This is, even if you look back at pictures of the first Intifada in Gaza, there were Israeli tanks, where there were only open jeeps in the West Bank. So it always had more share of direct military violence than other parts of historical Palestine. And yet, our most brilliant bloggers are in Gaza. Our most brilliant voices on social media are from Gaza. Our most amazing artists are from Gaza. And they continue to amaze, right? That in the middle of this genocide, I know that from day one, the first thing that Palestinian therapists did is they organized psychosocial support sessions for children, for women, for young men. I don't know how to me, I mean, it's great. You're under bombardment, you're displaced, you're in a bad tent, you have to worry about getting water and food, you're most likely hungry, and yet you're doing what you can to keep society together, right? By painting, by singing, by playing, by just giving people a chance to cry. We haven't had a chance to mourn, to cry for 8 months. I haven't personally had the luxury of grieving for the friends I lost, or even the places, because the places, as a friend of mine told me, these are not just stones, right? These homes and areas, neighborhoods that we lost are, you hear our cries and laughs. They're home to a life that was decimated, and they deserve to be grieved, but we haven't had time to do that. And yet you see all of that. You see teachers creating tents to give students a chance to feel a bit of normalcy. They know they're not going to get an education, but just to give them a chance to hold a paper and pen, to draw, to rehash their memory of numbers. That is the essence of God, a place that doesn't know how to give up on living, and doesn't want to. That place, people that love passionately, and also resist with a lot of passion. So they never do something, half-assed, as the Americans say. They do it with heart, right? When they take you on, when they embrace you with all their heart. That's my lived experience. When I went to Gaza and I lived there, I was, an outsider. I didn't fit in any stereotype. Even my accent, my Palestinian accent is closer to Syrian, Arabic, which is where I was born. And so I was, someone dropped out of outer space. And yet I was embraced and loved for who I am, right? But that's the beauty of Gaza. It is honest that way. It likes you, it will tell you, make it known, If it doesn't, you will really know it, which is a great question. And yeah, and I think that's why it's, impossible to keep. Also, so yes, definitely celebrate that.
Thank you, and I think on behalf of everyone, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you, Lara. And yeah, if anyone would like to ask any questions, I think we've probably got a bit of time.
Okay.
So if anyone has any immediate questions, please go ahead and ask.
I have a question about sorry, I should have phrased it better first in my head. That the thing, I'm a British woman, right, and how to get British people, as you say, to understand the history of their behaviour in Palestine, and but also they are so resistant to seeing that because it also shows them their behaviour in Turtle Island, in Australia, in India, and you know, and then there's kind of that stack of cards on which they have built their idea of themselves and their integrity and their ethics and their civilization completely disintegrates and falls apart, and so that is I wondered maybe I suppose that's the work that I'm working on, how to join those dots, to join those understandings up, to make steps between them. So my question was how I suppose possibly as a legal question as well, how do you come up against that, and how do you respond, or what sort of way of connecting them?
I mean, I've learned that sometimes we need to be strategic, right? And so maybe not go in a straight line, because this is a very painful path, right? To kind of unravel the self-image. It is very painful, and some would say, you know, punishing. So start with the comment, right? Start with a conversation, or with where you can agree that what is happening is unjust and wrong, and on a basic level, before getting into the painful stuff of British complicity or British responsibility. Because I think it's difficult to start from the end. When you have, you know, it's difficult to start by saying, we have to admit we have a role in this, and then explain everything else, right? But that's just strategy. It doesn't take away from all the right points that you've made and all the right points that would be said. But in terms of strategy, I found it might be easier to start by building on what can be common ground, and then moving from there, because it's almost, when you said domino, it is a domino effect. Once you're brought into that space, so to speak, and you're comfortable with the knowledge that you've gained on Palestine and where you stand on it, then it's easier to be open-minded to be all the rest of it, the painful part of it, right? But to start there, it's I think harder for many. I saw recently a video about two parents who were brought into the pro-Palestine sphere by their young daughter, who was graduating from, I forgot which university, in the US. And they were saying that they had no knowledge about Palestine before. They were pretty much mainstream Americans who were more inclined to be pro-Israel, right? And to be fearful, suspicious, and rowdy brown people. But and she started basically the conversation building on where she knew she could bring them in, right, on the common grounds, on the values that they brought her up. And once they could see that in the Palestine question, it was easier to develop the conversation further, without them feeling apprehensive or defensive, and needing to kind of dispel everything they were comfortable with before. I hope that makes sense.
I think we have a lot of healing to do in the UK as well. We know that, that's not news to anybody, and I think we're making tiny bits of progress towards that in lots of different contexts, like you alluded to. I think the way that we do that politically is a dead end. I think, to be completely honest, if you look at language being used currently by the Conservative government, talking about Palestine, talking about Gaza in 2024, it mirrors language that they used in 2004 when they were in opposition, talking about Gaza and Palestine. So there's been no progress in terms of language use in politics. Every now and again, you have moments where the dial shifts, and we have refreshing perspective in Parliament in Westminster. For example, recently, we've had unity from the SNP, from the Dems in opposition to question, to push, to scrutinise. And we've seen changes in policy, we've seen changes of stance on what the government has said in terms of what they're admitting to since October. They don't go any further back than that, their lines are very much still the same, and that very much translates across both major parties. Again, we've seen language very similar used by Labour in the last 2 decades. That hasn't changed. It got worse a little bit, and then it got better for a little bit, and now we've pretty much plateaued again. So for me, again, that brings us back to the law, okay? Imperfect, horrendously slow moving, but in terms of healing and in terms of progress, I think there are small steps being made there, right? When you have a case, you never know if you're going to win that case when you decide to take it to court, right? But if there's merit to that case, those discussions, those submissions, the evidence which is brought to light through those investigations, which can't happen outside of the legal context, because there's no capacity for it in politics to dig that deep or go into that much detail. There's no independence in politics. There's only accountability to your party, so you can't have a clear vision or perspective when you're analysing particular facts, but the law can do that. And so even if these arrest warrants never come to fruition, this process of applying for them and the conversation which that has brought about is massive, is absolutely massive. Even if the ICJ advisory opinions are not adhered to, which they're obviously not, the submissions from South Africa put evidence into the public sphere, again, very much being jumped on by social media, by younger generations, through TikTok, because they're being understood and translated into language which is more accessible to the public. And so those, what is would normally be a very exclusive context of international law and courts and how this process is working. I'm a lawyer, that's confused by them. You know, we understand now what's happening in a way which is digestible. And that means we can understand the facts of what are happening again in that legal context where there are consequences to that. So almost the end result is less important than the process of trying to get there. And I think that is a massive part of how we can heal and how British citizens, specifically people who live in the UK, people who are viewing this from the British perspective, can really challenge our own beliefs. And I think it goes absolutely hand in hand with other colonial contexts that we're challenging, lots of which was brought to light during Black Lives Matter, and these movements and these grassroots movements and these, you know, real pushes for the public to go, we're not okay with this, this is not all right, all comes together. And I think you have to, in order to kind of find some hope from it, I think you have to step back a little bit and look at it as a wider picture and see all these pieces moving together.
And see how it will ultimately change what is acceptable in mainstream politics. I think the fight against apartheid South Africa went through a very similar cycle. You guys were on the last to join the fold, but it became untenable to be pro-apartheid at the end. And that's, I think, what we can draw hope from.
Can I just add a super quick point for reasons you might be interested in? I think it's both described as quite a lot of feelings between different oppressed communities within Western society. There's a lot of translation or parallels that people are drawing that keeps them, we're seeing it in the climate change movements as well as in discussing Black Lives Matter and the like, and Alex Beeman, Geography's Liberation, Making of an Arab Imaginary, back in 2014, was talking about intercommunalism, and it was when Black Arab Jews in Israel were struggling and formed their own Israeli-backed party. They were talking about the ghettoization within America and also hierarchy within Israeli society, forming huge bands of solidarity, even though it seemed like they're disparate communities. And I think that's one thing I'm trying to translate to my research now. My thesis is this idea of a digital version of intercommunalism that we're seeing on social media. Even things I know that a lot of people, and this is recurrent cycle with something like the all eyes on Earth, that AI generated thing that everyone just saw on Instagram, although it did very much sanitize like all the horrific things we're seeing. Actually, a lot of people think it was able to get around the algorithm, which is well known for containing Palestinian narratives and so different linguistic tools to write an act instead of an A, things like that. And it was brought to people's horizons, visions in a way that no other social media graphic has seen. So these things always different dualities to it, but I think if you're trying to see maybe where different communities come together, actually looking at the liberation movements that have preceded us are so insightful.
Thank you all for being here. My question for Laura, I think when you talk about international law, sort of, I think it's difficult to come from a point where you're saying that law is more accurate or better approach compared to politics. But I think it's so difficult to divorce the two, especially in the context of international law, which is westernized and a Western concept. And really, if you look at especially the 20th century and the formation of Israeli apartheid, international law was actually a tool that allowed it to happen. It was all through international law, through the United Nations, through the League of Nations that Israel was able to, establish itself and then sustain itself all throughout history up until this point. And I think this question of master's tools, can they dismantle the master's house? How can we look at international law, especially under the guise of third world purchase international law, as a point of state, like as a savior of any kind, compared to really as just a way to continue to sustain injustice.
Everything you said is completely true, and I agree with every single point you make. And it is incredibly important to continue to challenge that and continue to raise these liberal approaches or critical approaches to international law. I love legal theory, so I think it's very interesting, but also very relevant. And in terms of how we take that knowledge and we take that understanding and we put that into the current structures that we have, whilst remaining optimistic that they can be a tool for change, impossible question, right? And I think that very much depends on your personal perception of international law. It's right to say that it has been a tool that has been incredibly harmful, that has perpetuated racism, that has perpetuated persecution. It absolutely has. And you wouldn't be able to have a constructive conversation about the international law as a tool without first acknowledging that, which is a theme generally that we're discussing today, right? How do we move forward with actors who are broadly and historically, have gone about with impunity, right? But I hate to really oversimplify it, but I think given the context, given the immediacy with which we need to be using the tools at our disposal, we should be less concerned, although still understanding that these tools are imperfect, right? We need to use what we've got and we need to continue to make it better. You can talk about deconstructing the systems that we have and building it up from the ground, which again, I don't think is particularly out for question given where it looks like global politics is moving. But I think you can do that whilst also simultaneously exploiting the mechanisms and the processes which do work, right? And that again is a very difficult mentality to accept, especially as a student, right? Where you're learning about all of this and you're understanding how it is that these systems, which especially in the UK, we're told are good systems. We're told that the law and the UN are these like great powerhouses that have made life better for everyone and solved some crises. And yeah, there may be good intentions behind those, but the drafters also of, you know, these treaties or the Rome Statute, for example, couldn't possibly envision the world of conflict that we are currently in today, where non-international armed conflict is what we see on a kind of more regular basis when we're talking about conflict, where Russia and Ukraine is actually the anomaly for what crisis and conflict is like, where we have the gray area between terrorism and conflict so blurred. It's so difficult to use these tools that have been so badly corrupted to make change. But from my perspective, I think we have to continue to try to do that whilst understanding the harm that they've caused in the past, because we don't really have the time at the moment to reconstruct these institutions. I don't think that's out of the question in the future, but I think right now we're in a moment where we need to rally and we need to use these in the way, in the best way we possibly can. Well, that's a detailed satisfying answer, and I fully accept that.
But I think that's what South Africa did.
Yeah.
It rose from the global south, took the international lead, and basically told the global north, okay, you made this system, now I will use it, and I will challenge you to play by the rules. And that's why you had a nervous meltdown, right? You said, well, how could they, how dare they? Like, well, these are your rules, we're just using.
Like Palestine being a state for the purpose of the ICC, right? Like, that was impossible. That could never have happened. It's not a system which was used, like, which was constructed for Palestine. But here we are. It's not perfect. People don't like it, but it's happening. And that's, we cannot lose sight of that, right? As lawyers, as academics, as people who are interested in this, from whatever, you know, academic context you're coming from, we cannot lose sight of things like that. Because if we lose focus, young generations from moving up into these positions of responsibility or positions of authority, we cannot lose sight of the changes that have been made so that we can continue to make changes.
In a way, you're reconstructing it using, you know, from not, I won't say from within, but using the tools that were never intended for that.
Has anyone got any more questions?
I've got questions about schools if anybody else hasn't got them, but I don't want to go again.
Can I just double check the time?
10 to 12.
10 to 12. We just have to leave shortly after 12.
Okay.
So,
I have kids in school, and my daughter's school, they brought in solutions, not science, without telling the parent body. They just brought in, they said, oh, we're going to bring people in, we're going to do talks. And so they brought in this organization which says it's equal and is just heavily encouraging the children to be quiet and think of all sides and all that. It's very offensive. And so I've made a big complaint, and I'm just deciding whether to take it to Ofsted, but it doesn't. So I just wondered if you had any knowledge of, you know, solutions on science funded by the government to a massive amount, and or at least 50,000 in the last round of funding. And Ofsted don't seem to be in any way objecting or making a stand. And I just wondered if there was anything from one of the three views on how to intervene, or I mean, I could just keep making complaints, but I'm not familiar with other.
yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
That's right.
I am. Yeah, I can exactly speak to it. Definitely take it off.
Oh, great.
Definitely take it off. That we can have, if you'd like, if you can have a conversation outside of this context. I can give you my details for this. I know lots of people who have very, very similar experiences. I know that there is a general movement towards challenging this, at least, or kind of having a conversation about it. We're having a conversation about education at the beginning before we started this panel about potential changes with a Labour government coming in terms of school curriculums. And I think that's another interesting conversation we have. One of the things I would say is the Balfour Project. And one of the initiatives that we've been running for the last couple of years is a education curriculum project, where we've been training teachers about using the British Boundary period within their curriculum in both history and politics for GCSEs. And at first we were going into schools and teaching one-off classes, and we're now training teachers how to incorporate this into their curriculums. And that's something which has been very, very well received. And we've had more teachers come to us to ask for this curriculum than we've had asked them to teachers now. But yeah, I would very happy to talk to you about it.
Great, I love that. Thank you very much.
So I just, no one can show their appreciation again for Lara.